Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Hey, everybody. Welcome to In the Beginning, a Bible story for the girlies with me, Avela Fongoka. And basically, this is just a podcast where we're going to talk about the different stories in the Bible in hopes of motivating each other to get into this Jesus bag for ourselves. The goal is to go ahead and open up the Bible for ourselves and read the story for ourselves. But I feel like sometimes it's helpful to talk about it. So today we're going to get into probably the most well-known story in the Bible. And it is the mess that was Adam and Eve. Okay, no, maybe that's unfair. I don't want to call them a mess, but like it is a tragedy. Like there's a lot that actually happens in the story, and I feel like growing up, we always like focus on the thing that takes place, like the apple. Meanwhile, like there's actually so much else that's happening around that you're like, wow, like that is tragic. Like that's so sad. Like that's actually crazy. So that's what we're getting into today. So technically, by the time we get to Adam and Eve, this is day 6 of creation, which means that there was a days 1 to 5 before we get to the story actually coming into play. So here's what you missed on Glee. Okay. God says, let there be light, and separates the light from the darkness, calls the light day and the darkness night. So he creates time, basically. Separating water, like days 1 to 3, God is just organizing things. Like he's really just organizing things and creating weather and creating time and really just creating an environment for life to thrive. And we start to see like on days 4 and 5, like he brings the land about and vegetation comes about, and he starts decorating this home that he's creating. He puts birds in the sky and fish in the sea, and he's beautifying the place. He's creating a home. And finally we get to day 6, and I don't want to say God asked himself the question, but there is this question of who's going to look after this earth for him, who's going to tend the earth. And God's solution to this, and I don't even think it was necessarily a solution, because I do think the intention the whole time was for mankind to exist. But we can talk about that a different day, because that is a completely different conversation. Point is, we get to day 6, and God decides to make mankind with the intention of having them, rule over the earth on his behalf and sort of like tend to the earth for him. Right? So that's where we find everything. Here we are, day 6, Adam and Eve. So this is what the Bible says. This is the story, folks. God decides that he wants to make mankind, and he wants to make mankind in the image and in the likeness of himself. And so he does. He takes dust, breathes the breath of life into it. Boom, we got a man. Because when you're God, that's all it takes. That's all it takes. So boom, we have a man. Now he takes this man and he places this man in the Garden of Eden. Now listen, I was not there. I was not there. But I would like to encourage you to just humor me for a second. This is the most beautiful, luscious, green garden you could think of. Whatever fruit you could think of, put it in the garden. Even a fruit that doesn't even make sense, like a fruit that probably doesn't even exist, make it up. Put it in the garden. Like none of us are there, but for all intents and purposes, we know that it would have been the most beautiful garden. Like it just would have been the most beautiful garden. But in any case, there he is in this garden with God, and God blesses this man in the garden and says, listen, dude, be fruitful and multiply, okay? Rule over this earth. Everything in this garden that you see, you may have it for food. All the plants and the trees, it's yours for the taking, except for that one tree over there, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Leave that one alone. Everything else, though, literally go crazy and have the time of your life. But don't eat that tree. Don't eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But everything else, knock yourself out, Adam. So they're living life, they're having a good time and all of that stuff. And I know, like, we spoke about the fact that Adam's function, like he's there to look after the earth for God, but we start to get hints that there's actually a lot more to this relationship between God and this man, because it's not just about the fact that like, okay, Adam is looking after this garden for God, but it's like they have a literal relationship. I'm talking God would bring animals to Adam and be like, go ahead and name it, Adam. And whatever Adam called it, God was like, cool, like that's what we're gonna go with. You said hippopotamus, it's a hippopotamus. Like that's what we're gonna go with. And I feel like I'd be doing you guys a disservice if I didn't also include a little like backstory into this whole image and likeness thing, right? Because I feel like it plays a really, really big role in terms of how God sees these people and in general, like what we were actually meant to be from the very inception of us. So Adam and Eve would have been part of English guys. Adam and Eve would have been part of a book called Genesis. Genesis would have been written by a man named Moses. Now it's okay if you don't know who Moses is, because I'm going to give you a brief summary of him without spoiling the story, because God willing, we're going to get into the story ourselves on this podcast. But basically, Moses is a man that God uses to get the Israelites out of slavery. And there's a lot of miracles. There's a lot of like God things that take place. When I say God things, I mean like God things, like God flexes. There we go, that's the word. Like God's like doing a lot of God flexes and gets them out. And so because Moses is the person who wrote this book, we can assume that the audience of this book would have been the Israelites that he gets out of slavery. Now, the reason that's important is because there's a lot of things that come up in Genesis that to us now when we read it, it doesn't hold like the same weight that it would have back then, but there's certain things that when they would have read it, it would have held a lot of significance to them and it would have meant something to them, right? Excuse me. So basically, these people who have come out of slavery, they were familiar with the idea, and I guess we're familiar with this idea too, because it's not that far away from like something that we can imagine. Back then, there would have been kings who had kingdoms, and these kingdoms would be really, really large. And sometimes the king wouldn't always be in every single part of the kingdom, but it was really important for those people to know whose kingdom it was, even if the king wasn't going to be physically there with them all the time. So, what most kings utilized throughout history, and we know this, are statues that they would place in like the different towns that are their kingdoms, so that even in the absence of the king, the citizens or like the subjects of that time would be able to see the statue in that town and know that this town belongs to the king. We are in the land of this specific king, even though he's not here right now. Now, these statues that would have been put around these kingdoms would have been made in the image and in the likeness of the king, so that when people look at these statues, they would look at it and see the king and know this is the king's territory, we're in the king's land. And so it meant something to the Israelites, of that time, that when God is talking about making mankind, he says he makes them in the image and in the likeness of himself. So for all intents, I feel like I've said intents and purposes like 5 times already, but for all intents and purposes, we are like God's statues. Like that is like the role that we are playing currently within his creation. We are the things that like God's creation, like the animals would look at to know, oh, this is whose kingdom I'm in because of us, which is crazy. But in any case, we're talking about the relationship between Adam and God. And that's what it's giving. Like God is letting Adam not just like rule. It's not like God is just like ruling through Adam, but it's like he's ruling with Adam. Like Adam is naming these animals and God is abiding by like the things that Adam is saying. He's like, yeah, cool. Like whatever you say, dude, live your life. So it's really, really cute, this relationship that I don't want to call it cute, but like in my mind, I was like, oh, that is cute. So that's what's happening. And while God is bringing these animals to Adam, to name, he's also trying to find a suitable helper for himself, but he doesn't find one. So God is like, okay, well, it's not good for man to be alone. So he puts Adam in a deep sleep, and in this deep sleep, like I said, I was not there. I want everybody to remember that throughout this, I was not there. So whether or not God actually performs surgery on Adam or gives Adam a dream, I was not there. But I am inclined to believe that God gives Adam a dream or a vision. And in this vision, he takes out Adam's side and creates a woman. He creates a partner or a helper for Adam from the fact that he's like from his side. Now, some translations are going to say takes out a rib. Some of them say his side. I like side better because of what Adam's about to say in this next part. So I like side better. God takes out a side and he makes a helper for Adam. Now, Adam wakes up and my guy turns into a poet. He turns into a poet, okay? Like he starts, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, okay? We're gonna call you woman because out of man you were taken. Like he just starts spitting game, and up until this point really we actually haven't heard Adam say anything. Like I know he said he was naming animals. We didn't, it wasn't recorded what specifically he said or what animal he named. We just know that he did. So this is the first time Adam is even like with receipts opening his mouth, and here he goes, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Like, so anyway, to me, I thought this was really, really romantic because first of all, while Adam, I say I'm a lot, guys. Anyway, while Adam is naming all these animals, we don't see him name himself, but it looks like he names this woman, and from having named the woman, he's then able to name himself. I don't know how to say that better, but it's almost like through being able to identify the woman and like what she means to him, who he is in relation to her, that's how he then knows who he is. I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense, but I thought that was really cute. Like, I think, because in general, when God gives us dreams or God gives us visions, there's a revelation in it. There's something he's trying to reveal to you. So that's why I'm more inclined to believe that it's more about him giving him a dream than it actually is like, oh, he surgically removed a rib and made Eve. But I was not there. I was not there. But anyway, I think God was trying to reveal to Adam, like, hey, there's gonna be this girl, and you are to treat her like she literally came from you. Like she is supposed to matter to you. She is practically you. I mean, not practically, but like she's supposed to matter. She practically came from you. And it gives that. Like she comes out and he is enthralled, if I had a better word, like bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Like he is using metered verse to talk about this girl. Like he is there. So we've got two good relationships right now. We've got God and Adam, and now we've got Adam and Eve. So we've got like a good little, like, you know, life is good. Life couldn't be better, arguably. Arguably. So anyway, these guys are chilling. Life is great. Couldn't be better. Now you guys remember I was telling you about when God was like, be fruitful, multiply, and he was talking to Adam, be fruitful, multiply, eat whatever you want, but don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Right? Remember all of that? Great. So let's swiftly move along. So one day, this cunning, some translations even say crafty, serpent comes along. And he's like, did God really say that you shouldn't eat from the trees in the garden? And Eve, okay, like honestly starts out really strong. And she's like, no, that's not what he says. Like she's a little in her bag. Like she knows what she can and cannot do. And she's like, no, he didn't say that. He said, eat of whatever tree you want, but don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then she says, don't even touch it. Where did that come from? I don't know. But she does say it. So anyway, ooh, my foot is dead. But she says, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't even touch it, or you will certainly die. That's what Eve says. So she knows the rule. Like she knows not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she even adds her own little sugar and spice and says, don't even touch it. Don't even touch it, or you will surely die. And the snake goes, well, you will not surely die. Okay, God knows that if you eat of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, you will be like him, knowing good and evil. Now, to me, this was actually really crazy because at first glance, it actually kind of looks like the serpent is telling the truth, right? And the only thing that actually made me go back and look at it again was, I grew up in the church, so I know the devil is a liar, right? Poor Eve really didn't know that though, and he's crafty. He is cunning. And he does a really good job of disguising this lie and making it sound like it's possibly the truth. Because the devil is a liar, but he's not stupid. Like, he's not stupid. And the reason why I say that, right, is because the part where he was like, you will certainly not die. Now, we know that has to be a lie because that's literally the opposite of what God said. Where God was like, don't eat of it or you will certainly die, right? In any case, then he says, like God, suggests that God would fear this idea of us becoming like him, knowing good and evil. Now, the part that sounds truthful is that if we eat of the tree, we would know good and evil. And that's the part, that's really the only truthful part, because the rest of the statement is just a lie. But this idea that God fears that we would be like him when he made us to be like him is like the saddest trap ever, because quite literally we're already eating of this tree in the garden, right, called the tree of life, which means for all intents and purposes we're not immortal beings, but the ability to be immortal is at our disposal, like as in we can eat of the tree of life and we continue to live, and we're already made in God's image and his likeness. Point is, God doesn't fear us being like him. But that's what the serpent says. If you will not certainly die, for God knows that if you eat of the tree of good and not the knowledge of good and evil, you will be like him, knowing the difference between good and evil. In any case, Eve was convinced. So she takes the apple. Well, we don't know if it's an apple, but she takes the fruit. I always imagined it was an apple. But anyway, she takes the fruit and she eats it. And it says she passes it to Adam, who was with her. Okay? Adam was with. Now, honestly, this is going to be a really, really good time to tell you guys that I'm not the biggest fan of Adam. All right, like I'm being really, really honest with you guys because it's gonna come up, right? Like I relate to them, I get it. I even feel for both of them. I really, really feel for both of them. But I feel like one, because the way the story has been told over history focuses mainly on the fact that Eve is the person that has taken the apple, and it feels like Eve and Eve and Eve. When they said who was with her, I genuinely was like, who was with her? Because I know it wasn't Adam. Like I know it wasn't Adam, the guy that was naming animals in the garden with God. Like I know it's not that same Adam who was just spending time with God one-on-one in this luscious green garden. I know it wasn't that Adam that was with Eve this whole time. Because here's the other thing that I feel like poor Eve, okay? The other thing that poor Eve had working against her, she wasn't there when God said, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and, eat from whatever you want, but don't eat from the knowledge of the tree. He tells Adam that. So when Eve gets this second-hand law, the reason I say second-hand, because let's assume, it would have come from Adam, right? She even, who, I don't, sorry, let me calm down. I don't know if you guys have siblings, but I do. And if something were to happen, like say for example, my mom's upstairs and my siblings and I downstairs, and something breaks downstairs, chances are my mom's gonna call out to my brother, my older brother first, to be like, what happened? Why? Because you've been here longer. Like you should know the rules. Like there must be, and above and beyond that, like this is husband and wife. Like I get it. I give them I understand because this is a talking snake. Like I'm on their side when it comes to that. Like I would be just as stunned. Like I would hang on to each and every single word that the snake says because you're a snake at the end of the day. Like you're talking with words. Do you get what I mean? So I understand why the snake was allowed to speak. Like I understand that. But I feel like the very fact that the snake even approached Eve was because of that very disadvantage that Eve she wouldn't have necessarily the same relationship that Adam would have had with God. It's not to say that it would have been like an inferior relationship, but it's more that Adam has been there longer. He had like bigger responsibilities, one-on-one. He heard the law firsthand. Like the very fact that Satan would even approach Eve, who's vulnerable because she didn't hear this law firsthand. It's given to her. And the thing that she says, it's not inherently bad that she adds her sugar and spice and says, don't even touch it or you will certainly die. But it just proves broken telephone. Like that's all that it gives, is the fact that like God didn't say that, but here is Eve quoting the scripture back, and like she says, she has the right idea about it, but like she's vulnerable because she's not even quoting the exact words that God said, because she wasn't the one who heard it. You know who heard it? Adam. And he was there the whole time. But I raised my case. Anyway, I raised my case. So in any case, they bite this fruit and they now have the knowledge of good and evil. And just to make things better, they now hear God walking in the garden. They hear God wrestling about, doing what God does in the garden, I guess. And they hear God and they hide. And God calls out to them. Actually, no. He doesn't call out to them. He calls out to Adam. Because remember what I said? If something goes wrong downstairs, my mom's calling my older brother, right? You see how different it is? Satan talks to Eve, but God calls out to Adam. Okay? Anyway, God's like, Adam, where are you? Obviously, that's not how I picture God talking. But what are we going to do? Anyway, so he goes, Adam, where are you? And Adam is like, we heard you in the garden, so we hid because we're naked. And God's like, who told you that you're naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? Pause. Pause. Everybody pause. Because the first thing is, this is God that we're talking about. So for all intents and purposes, he's God. So when he comes down, he knows what's happened in this garden. He already knows. So you have to ask yourself, why is he asking these questions? Why are you asking these questions? And I think God was trying to extend, not an olive branch, but trying to like give these two an opportunity to come clean. So even despite the fact that he has laid a law and this law has been broken and he knows that this law has been broken, he's still trying to give them the opportunity to be like, tell me, repent, just talk to me, buddy. Tell me what you did. Anyway, God is like, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? And here goes our superstar Adam. Here he goes. He said, well, the woman that you gave to me. No, let me read that better. Because this is how I read it. The woman that you... Dude, Adam is crazy to me. Like, he just like... He says, the woman that you gave to me, she gave me a fruit and I ate it. This is crazy to me. This is the tragedy. This statement, that one sentence, is the whole tragedy to me. Because do you remember how beautiful life was where we're coming from? Do you remember that? Because I do. I do. When God and Adam had a good relationship and they were naming animals in the garden and kicking their feet and enjoying life and like living a good life, like I remember that. And do you also remember when Eve shows up and he turns into a rapper? Like he speaks in melodies about how this woman has changed his life for good. Like do you remember that? Do you remember where we're coming from? How good life was? And now here he goes in one sentence, turning his back on Eve. And then, like, I don't even know who the blame was because he blames Eve to blame God. Turns his back on both of them in one sentence. I don't know if you guys have watched Inside Out, but what I imagine going on every time I read this one sentence, it's like, if you watch Inside Out, this girl, Miley, what's her name? Riley, has these personality islands inside of her head. And whenever, like, in the real world, something would go wrong concerning these islands, the islands would shake. And in the first one, some of them even start falling when it's like, oh, this is irreparable damage. The islands start to fall. in my head, when he says that, the relationship with his wife, that island, falls, okay? And then at least the relationship with God, I don't want to say falls, but it sure does shake. I said Adam and Eve's relationship falls because if I was Eve, you would throw me under the bus in front of God. But I'm not Eve, and I was not there. And and I even understand. I actually do understand. Like, I know that I am being hard on Adam, but I do also understand, like, in their minds, this idea of, like, you will certainly. Let's move on. Anyway, let's move on. Because I'm getting ahead of myself. Point is, Adam then says, the woman that you gave to me, she gave me a fruit, and I ate it. What else can I say? Like, I'm so passionate about this part. But anyway, so God turns to Eve and he's like, what have you done? So now Eve gets this olive branch to repent. And she doesn't take it either. But I mean, I feel like I would have said what Eve says though. Like, I do feel like what Eve said would have been exactly what I would have said, which is like, I was spoken about the serpent. I'm like, God, you actually wouldn't believe it, but there was a snake that was down here, and he started talking, and he was making a lot of sense. God, like, he was talking. That's what I would have led with. Like, I feel like God understands that this is a talking snake. I don't think the animals were talking. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know we said this is the most, like, grand garden we have ever seen, but I don't think the animals were talking. Like, I really would have led with that. So that's why I feel like I kind of get what Eve was saying. But still, there wasn't really any responsibility that was taken. But she says, so the serpent deceived me and I ate. Anyway, so sorry. I swear I'm not judging them. This is just like, it's just a hard story to read. Anyway, so God turns to the serpent and he's like, what is this that you have done? And he curses really everybody. Everybody's getting a whooping. Everybody gets whooped. Basically, he says that Adam will have to, now when he works the land, it will be like through the sweat of his brow. Like, he's gonna have to break a sweat when he labors over this land now. And Eve, child labor, sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but when she goes through her child labor, it will be painful, is what her thing is, her whooping. And he tells the serpent that all the days of his life he will, crawl on his belly, and basically speaks, I don't want to say, like, I don't know if prophetic word is the word that I'm looking for, but he does create this bigger image, ultimately saying that man will crush the head of the serpent, but the serpent will bite man's heel. Now, this image is actually really, really deep and screams Jesus, because it's this idea that one day man will triumph over evil and triumph over the serpent, but the serpent will deliver a blow to mankind in this process. So we don't have to get too deep into it because there's no way to get too deep into it without spoiling the rest of the stories, but this is what happens. So he kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden. Now, on the bright side, okay? Because when you actually sit and you reflect over this whole story, there's like a million things to talk about. The bright side is that we know that God has a rescue plan for humanity. Like, it's not like he's just shunned them from the garden and been like, this is it. Like, I'm over you guys. Like, we know that there is this God who loves us enough that he is like, dude, despite your humanness, despite your inclination to be so human, okay? I love you and I'm determined to make this work. I'm determined to rule this earth with you. And so there's a bigger rescue plan that God sets in motion, having kicked them out of the garden. And then another thing that I was thinking about, right, is when I was thinking about Adam and Eve, like, remember I said, as much as I have so many opinions regarding Adam, I do feel for him, because I also think it was one of those situations where it was like his back was against the wall, like, in their minds, God said, if you do this thing, if you eat from this tree, You will certainly die. Now, we know in today's world, and obviously they then found out when they got kicked out, that God didn't mean right there and then. Like, it wasn't like an immediate death. But at the time, before, if we think about the story without knowing how it ends, they probably thought that it was a more immediate thing, like that God would kill them right then and there. And considering again the very fact that Adam was there first and probably had like a better relationship with God, and was there longer and probably had a deeper connection to what this creation actually is, he has a lot to lose. Like, he has a lot to mourn. He has a lot that he is like, that's probably flashing in front of his eyes to be like, I don't want to lose this. Like, I don't want to lose this. So his back is against the wall. And what does he do in his most desperate hour? He turns his back on everybody. But like, my point is, I do feel for them in that sense that like, I don't know at all what it feels like to have been in their shoes. Like, actually, I really don't know, because thank God I have stories like Adam and Eve to look back to know how crafty and cunning the serpent is. And also do you know what I mean? And to know how merciful God is that he would allow me the opportunity to repent and things could be okay. But they didn't have those stories. So like, what does one do? Like, what do you do? And that's what he chose. And like, I don't judge him. But like, I just be reading with opinions. Like, I don't judge him. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I just have thoughts about him. Like, he really just like he moves the story along. Like, he really moves the story along for me. And the other thing, that when we talk about God's mercy, it doesn't just stop at the fact that he gave them the opportunity to repent. Like, the very fact that God kicks them out of the garden was actually merciful. Because when you sit and you realize that they ate from the tree of that's a hard name, man. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? They weren't just aware of their evil. Like, it wasn't just the fact that like they had messed up that they were now aware of, but they were also aware of goodness. And who is more good than God? Like, quite literally. So it's like they're sitting in this complete awareness and knowledge that God is so good, and they have messed up so bad. And the truth is, if they would have stayed in the garden after this whole thing had happened, the pain of that knowledge that they have messed up so bad against someone who just radiates being good, is literally the source and the essence of goodness, that would probably hurt like hell. Like, and I'm not saying that, like, I literally mean it would turn into hell for them if God didn't kick them out of the garden. So he kicks them out, but kicks them out for their own good. Anyway, there's just so many like questions and things that come up when it, but I feel like the story of Adam and Eve is such a carefully created story that depicts the radical love that God has for us. What's so brilliant about the story of Adam and Eve is that it does truly depict humanity. And it's such a perfect image. It's actually a perfect image of free will. That's what's beautiful about the garden. The garden is a perfect image of free will, because how can we say that we love and we obey God without the choice to not do it? Do you get what I mean? So I don't know. I think it's just it's a good story. And if there's anything that we should gather from it, it's that regardless of literally everything, he is a God that is dedicated in how much he loves us. And he figures out a plan to rescue us despite our humanness getting in the way. And yeah, like, he's just really dedicated to this idea that he wants to rule the earth with us. And everything unfolds after this as a result. And so we serve a good and a merciful God. But anyway, that is the story of Adam and Eve. And so they are driven out of the garden, angels are placed at the gate so that they cannot get back into the garden. And so they are introduced to the outside world, outside the garden. And what that looks like is, it actually really only gets better from here, plotline wise. Humanity wise, it's a mess. It's a mess. But the plots get really great from here on onwards. But that was Adam and Eve, guys. Well, at least it was the way that I read it. And so I love you guys, and I hope that you enjoyed this story, and I hope I'm going to see you in the next episode, which is where we are. No, I'm not even going to tell you, but it's good. It's good. And so if you want to find out, I'll see you in the next episode. Anyway, I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. This has been Avela Fongwaka, and in the beginning, a Bible story for the girlies. Okay, so thank you guys so much. I appreciate you being here. Subscribe or follow or like. Do what it is that you're supposed to do. Love you guys.